Hello and welcome to the NewsX Sunday Guardian Roundtable. Well, it's been 25 years ever since Manmohan Singh and Narasimha Rao opened up the economy. So today we'll be discussing how India has handled that legacy, which also brings us to the corollary question: are big bang reforms better or slow incremental ones, as is being undertaken by the current Prime Minister? Joining me on the roundtable is Mr. Vijay. He's a financial consultant and also BJP spokesperson. Mr. Sanjaya, political commentator, author, former media advisor to Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, and also a director for geoeconomics and strategy at the International Institute of Strategic Studies. We have Manish Tewari. He was the former INB minister in the UPA government and also national spokesperson for the Congress. And we have MK Venu, founding editor for the Wire.in. Mr. Tewari, I'm going to begin with a bit of nostalgia. Can you, take us back to the time when Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh worked together? They barely had, in May, Rao became Prime Minister, and by July, they already had the blueprint for the opening up laid out.
Yes, absolutely. And the credit for that should go to Chandrasekhar and Yashwant Sinha, because they actually prepared a budgetary policy and a reform package, which was to be introduced in February 1991 by Mr. Yashwant Sinha as finance minister. And he couldn't do it because the Congress party decided to withdraw support to the Chandrasekhar government. Right. And they had to take a vote on account. So when Narasimha Rao became Prime Minister in June 1991, the government had already a document prepared by the previous government, and therefore didn't really need too much time. But I want to make a distinction between crisis management and reform, because we keep using the term as if they were substitutes. Two things happened in July 91. One, there was a crisis. There was a balance of payments crisis, and there was several measures taken to deal with crisis management, like devaluation of the rupee, the budget that reduced the fiscal deficit, and trade policy reforms. But the second was reform, which is really decontrol, delicensing, opening up of business to private enterprise, which happened on July 24th when the new industrial policy was announced. So I think one must remember that there are two very different things happening in that period.
At that time. Manish, can I take it to what is happening now? Because we've all thought when Prime Minister Modi would come in, he would have some big ticket reform, because his whole plank was on development and economic reform. That didn't happen, but there have been steps that, have been gone down well. He's eased up the FDI norms, for instance.
Well, ultimately, economic liberalization or whatever else you may want to call it for the lack of a better name is one measure which has held the field from 1991 till 2016. And across different governments, across different dispensations, in varying degrees, the fundamental direction of what should be the mix of the Indian economy now has not really altered. So therefore, if you were to look at what happened between 2014 and 2016, yes, you do see very incremental baby steps being taken by this government in trying to further open the doors of the economy. I guess a part of it is also because most of the measures which this government is taking now are measures which they had opposed for 10 years. For example, the FDI in multi-brand retail, for example, even the opening up of the defense sector, for example, the opening up of the entire broadcasting space. All these are measures which came in for very trenchant criticism from the current government when they were in opposition. So I guess it takes a little while to, take a 180-degree turn and stand your positions on your head.
So he couldn't do it on the first day itself.
I would say that every government since 91 has broadly taken reforms forward. But within that, this fundamental mix that Manish spoke about, mix between market-oriented reforms and welfareism, this mix is changing. And this mix is changing because in the initial years, in the late 90s, there was a global kind of consensus in favor of more reforms. Things like privatization, liberalization, the Washington consensus was still kind of had some traction. But through the second term of UPA, from the second term of UPA, I think things began to change. Global economy slowing down, especially after the financial crisis. Global consensus again shifting more towards welfareism, whether you take the developed economies or developing. So that mix is now changing, you know, and
And there
I
was
think
that National Advisory Council, don't forget that.
yeah, and the Modi's government has also recognized that. Therefore, you see Mr. Modi always positioning himself very prominently on welfare schemes, but he doesn't openly talk about the reforms that he's doing. So this was true for even Narasimha Rao. They always, no leader ever projected himself as promoting, say good capitalism. Capitalism was a bad word, but is even is worse today, you know, when it comes to
Being a
when you see
pro-corporate.
the way what's happening in the world. So I think there is a shift more towards welfareism. Therefore, the Jan Dhan Yojana and by the present government, which is also a continuation of what the UPA too had realized and started course correcting, right?
Yeah. Why did it take Prime Minister Modi so long to open up sectors and all that? Because look at Narasimha Rao, he didn't even know he was being Prime Minister. If anybody knew it was Modi, he had all charted out in his mind. What took him so long?
Well, I think Modi took his time to settle down, I think, which is quite okay, considering the UPA had been in power for 10 years. And as Manish was saying, we were sort of politically opposing a few things which we are trying to do now. If you look at reforms from an economic angle, I think Sanjay's point was right. To some extent, reforms were thrust upon us, unlike in Russia, where they change in Eastern Europe, they dismantle. We were reforming from inside. I think all credit will be given by posterity to Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh. There's no doubt about that.
We've begun the credit part.
Yeah, wherever India before 91 and India after 91 was totally changed. We had this DGTD, which is an import license Raj, industrial license Raj, and it was MRTP, controller of capital issues. I remember making my pilgrimages to section officers in finance ministry, and it was just bad. So I think this duo, whatever Congress has often been called the reluctant reformers, but then you are not China, you have to take people along. So I think I'm a great admirer of that phase of India's development, and I think we unshackle the animal spirits. And after that, I think what Vajpayee ji did, and there I had fortunate to work very closely with that government, with Arun Shourie and others. And now what Modi is trying to do is, I would say, incremental.
Yes.
I would say adding the paras and this thing, because the big thing has done. And the thing about the incremental, and whenever we have discussions about reforms, we tend to differentiate. We don't understand that liberalization or globalization is one thing, and reforms to make India a more efficient place in all ways is different. The first part attracts attention, like FDI, when we did last few weeks back, we said FDI, and then we willy-nilly have brought in Walmart and Carrefour into agricultural trading and all that. That attracts a lot of attention, and media, the US press, and immediately we are called capitalists. But in my view, the tough part in Indian reforms is coming to labor reforms. Today we have a law where a company has to incur losses but cannot close an establishment if it's about 100 people. Judicial reform.
We spoke about what Mr. Vijay also said about Big Bang versus now incremental reforms. What is the need of the hour? Is Prime Minister Modi going about the right way?
Well, you see, Big Bang can only happen at particular moments in history. It's, you can't get up in the morning as Prime Minister and say, okay, today I'm going to do Big Bang. You need the political context. 1991 offered that political context, and it was the wisdom of P.V. Narasimha Rao that he used that opportunity to, in fact, undertake Big Bang reform. I mean, what he did on July 24th or even 4th July, the trade reform, etc., that was all done within the first month of that government. Mr. Modi had that opportunity in May 2014. Because he came after 10 years of UPA government. He came on the basis of a wave that gave him majority in parliament. He had the political opportunity, and as I've said many times before, the Congress was shell-shocked with its 44 MPs in parliament. It had not organized itself to respond. That was the time in that first budget session, in that first parliament session, to do whatever you liked. I mean, for example, if GST had actually been brought in that session, I cannot believe that Congress would have had the courage to oppose it. They were still recovering from their defeat.
Correct.
And Modi was on a wave, you know, he was at a high point.
Yeah, good point.
You know, he lost all that after the Delhi defeat, right? So the political momentum, no, it's okay.
I have a slightly different view.
Absolutely, you should have a different view.
Yeah.
But I think he lost it. So therefore, May, June 2014 was the opportunity for Big Bang. Once you missed that opportunity, I don't think now you can do Big Bang in the sense of do things which are difficult, for which political opposition builds itself. Today the Congress is, once again become assertive. They're preventing GST from happening. So gets difficult.
With the process. Manish, has Prime Minister Modi lost the opportunity, or was that the right time to do it really?
Well, first of all, I think the entire goods and services tax initiative is completely overhyped. Let me take you back to the February of 2011. In an interaction which the former Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, had with the editors of the electronic media, a question was asked with regard to why the goods and services tax is not going through. And the answer of the former Prime Minister is because the BJP wants that certain cases which have been instituted against certain political leaders in a particular state should be taken back, and that's the only way that they will allow GST to go forth. And this is not me speaking. This is the former Prime Minister of India in an interaction with the editors of the electronic media. So therefore, you had a paradigm where the BJP, for whatever reasons, opposed the GST for 5 long years. Suddenly, when you are in government, you wake up to the virtues of the GST and think that it is the biggest panacea for the Indian economy. Well, I do not agree with that, even if for whatever reasons the BJP has decided to push it. Number 2, if you step back and look at the Indian economy in a perspective, if you de-horse the change of the base year, the Indian economy is barely doing 5%. So therefore, this 7%, 7.2% is really a statistical jugglery. You today have unprecedented agrarian crisis across the country as we speak. In addition to that, you have a problem where the market sentiments are down. You look at
Even
any
after
sector.
the recent slew of opening of FDI.
You see, the thing is that a good indicator of that is that today your savings to GDP ratio is actually much higher than your savings to investment ratio. So therefore, what is really happening is that FDI is substituting what should have been domestic investment. So therefore, FDI really rides on top of domestic investment. Here, you have no domestic investment taking place, and this is the biggest question which foreign investors ask their Indian counterparts, that you want us to come and invest. Why aren't you investing in your own country? So therefore, beyond the headlines, beyond the mirage and the chimera, there is a serious economic crisis which this country faces today.
Is the situation as bad?
Priya, I've always maintained, even during the last 3-4 years of UPA, when growth really sort of plummeted, there were solid global reasons for that happening. As I said, from 2008 onwards, capital, there is data to show that global foreign investment flows have reduced by nearly $700-800 million. There are enough literature to suggest there's a deglobalization of trade, there's a deglobalization of capital flows. World trade is growing at barely 0%. World GDP growth is halved, compared to say 2007-8. So in this scenario, to expect India to outshine all other emerging markets and stand out is a bit of a tall order. Although I personally feel that in terms of fiscal management and managing of current account deficit and inflation, some improvement has happened. Data shows that there's an improvement, but food inflation is still going up. Now, reforms, as Vijay said, reforms also mean that you create a structure which kind of stabilizes inflation for a much longer period of time, which has not happened. Indian agriculture grew, had a robust growth rate in the 2000s, if you take 10 years. Now we are down to nearly last 2 years, close to 0.2% agriculture growth. Okay. This is seriously impacting rural wages, which currently rural wages growth are at negative.
Let him.
No, I'll is this a discussion on economic situation in the country or reforms? Because I'm happy about both. by the way, both of them are not linked
Okay.
at all. Anyway, the economic situation in the country, I think the country has problems.
No, I
It'll be, but if you look at it objectively, what's happening is private consumption in the country has come down. And the private sector is obviously not wanting to invest because the capacity utilization across sectors is only about 65 to 70%. And so they are not sure if they put in incremental capacity. So private investment is not taking place. You talk to so many businessmen, their cement capacity, the power capacity, everything is oversupplied. And you go one step deeper, the rural incomes are under strain after 2 monsoons and so forth. And also the government is doing classical Keynesian economics of trying to pump prime the economy by public investment. And you know, we're going all over selling India like all of us have to, you know, getting FDI. But then
that's another debate, we won't go into it.
no, I think it's good. I think foreign investment is good. I think that debate is over unless you're getting somebody like Sitaram Yechuri into this table. But then what type of, I mean, it's a very big debate by itself. I think the key issue now in the economy, whether it's the Congress coming to power or we remaining in power, is how to pump prime private consumption. And the 7th Pay Commission is obviously, and hopefully the monsoon will put rural development and agri-production. And you know, you have to understand India. India is a market-driven economy. And we are working towards certain fiscal deficit targets. We can't pump prime the economy by improving consumption. Even today, the inflation figures that came yesterday were menacingly high, you know. And we can't pump prime, put money into the system and get things up. I think that could be done, but I won't advise that as economist.
No, just one corrective. You know, a lot of what has been said is about 6 months back. Things have changed. Just yesterday, I was talking with a group of businessmen in the automobile and the tires industry. They are all now reaching full capacity. Demand for trucks has increased. Now, I remember when, you know, 20 years back when we were in economic times, you would say, look at demand for trucks. It's the first signal. It's like the clouds in the sky. It's the first signal of revival of economic activity.
We'll just take a quick break, but we're going to come back and find out also how we are handling the legacy given to us by the Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh. Welcome back to the NewsX Sunday Guardian Roundtable. We are here discussing reforms legacy. It's been 25 years ever since Manmohan Singh and Narasimha Rao initiated reforms in India. Manish, how are we handling their legacy of the reforms, the reform story? And in the middle, let's not forget one finance minister who will be very upset if we don't mention him when we talk reforms. Is Chidambaram. He also brought in his dream budget and, you know, along the way.
If you rewind back to 1991, the geopolitics of the world had completely transformed itself in a jiffy. The Soviet Union collapsed, East Europe collapsed, the entire socialist model of a command economy, you know, took a battering. And so therefore the only dominant ideology which was left was the new liberal economic ideology. And India at that point in time, I don't think willingly, but was, you know, forced kicking and screaming in order to, you know, liberalize and open up and kind of get, as you said, and kind of get in sync with the government. So therefore, if you look at the early years, you know, from 1991 till about 1998, you know, there was the celebration in India of the neoliberal economic model. But I think around 1998, the course correction started taking place. And people realized that in a country the size of India, the trickle-down effect will not work. So therefore, you had to combine a robust economic growth with certain kind of welfareism, which would take care of the poorer sections of society. And from 1998, well, maybe Mr. Vajpayee did not do it in that measure, but then from 2004 to 2014, it was done far more aggressively. And that fundamental template continues to hold the field. So, you know, within the neoliberal economic construct which India adopted, there has been this little tinkering of equity with growth, depending upon which government has been in office.
Can I just
Yeah.
come in on that? I mean, just to correct him, Venu and I were in a discussion with Vinay Sitapati, who's written the biography of Narasimha Rao, and one of the most important points that Vinay makes in that biography of Narasimha Rao is how, in fact, the Congress government of 91-96 walked on two legs of doing both liberalization and increasing spending on welfare. The idea that you need to do both, I think, has always been there. In a sense, it goes back to Nehru's idea of mixed economy. The only difference, and as Manish correctly said, is that in the late 90s, this had become a fad, this whole trickle-down theory argument, and that corrective has come subsequently.
Yeah, I want to add a point on that. I think we are subject to global thinking. Let's be honest about it. And there are a lot of, after communism collapsed, during the 90s, it was the mana, I mean, like opening up, and India could easily adjust the debate to that. Came 2000 and the financial crisis, Lehman, etc., and Rajan's book, and you know, things changed. Today, capitalism is not the great thing, and welfare is coming back. And India also, we have realized the trickle-down theory is an absurd theory, and there are studies which indicate that when you increase the GDP, it's only the top 10%, your e-commerce guys, etc., who buy those apartments in Gurgaon. But down below, so any government, whether it's a Manmohan Singh government or Modi government, has to understand that the rules of the game have changed. We have to be more caring, we have to be more sharing, whether the media calls it populist or not, that's different.
Well, the voters
Otherwise,
also,
I mean, the voters, and
they
look at
prefer
the,
it, as he said. They
Yeah,
go
yeah,
for
yeah.
election.
Also, Sanjay is right when he says that Narasimha Rao started a lot of welfare schemes and he had special focus. But the problem was, at that time, India did not produce enough growth and therefore enough tax revenues to fund those.
Correct.
The real big growth phase and collect tax revenues being shared with the states. After all, whatever center collects, it gives to the states, a large part. So that happened only after 2004, because the first year of 8.5% growth happened during Vajpayee's final year. After that, you had 8.5. So big, and Digvijay Singh keeps telling me this whenever I meet him, that when I was CM, we didn't have this big tax revenue growth, so therefore I couldn't build roads. All this happened. Therefore, between 2003, last 2 years of Vajpayee, and then the next 7-8 years, really saw massive development, public services, roads, all kinds of things. The state really went out and reached out to people in
May
welfare
I
schemes.
also just add
And therefore, and that process, and then eventually, when the global crisis came, 2008 financial crisis, after that, in the last 6-7 years, there's been wage stagnation. Brexit is an example of that. You know, so the bottom, say 60% of the population is restive everywhere, including in India.
Okay.
So
I'll
therefore,
bring in
Mr.
Manish now. Okay.
Modi is coming up with more schemes to address that self-employed, the 50% self-employed people.
very sensitive.
No,
yeah.
may I just add one thing to that? You see, the good thing which has happened between 1991 and 2016 is that you did not see the kind of asset stripping, the kind of wholesale junking of the public sector, which you saw in the erstwhile Soviet Union during the Yeltsin years. So therefore, you know, we've been very careful the way we've calibrated our entire reform process. You do not find, you know, those kind of oligarchs in India. There may be crony capitalists, but you do not find those kind of oligarchs which the Russian system
Well,
created.
you know, let me make an interesting political point, which is often not realized. The divide, the ideological divide on kind of Washington consensus or the right-wing neoliberal, as Manish put it, and a kind of more middle path, is not between political parties. It's not like Congress takes one position and the BJP. In fact, it is within all political parties.
All parties,
There is within Congress a left and a right.
A Jairam
There is
Ramesh and a Chidambaram.
No, exactly. Chidambaram and Jairam is a good example. I mean, Montek would be even right of Chidambaram. Then they wanted those big banks. For example, there was a lot of pressure in the 90s to go in for full convertibility of the rupee. People have forgotten that.
And within BJP,
Eh?
Swadeshi Jagaran, RSS.
And it's also the evolution of political thinking. A lot of people who were on the right actually moved to the left, and a lot of people on the left actually moved.
Let him get his political brownie point in. Start a whole new debate.
Manish, let me quote you my former boss, Dr. Manmohan Singh used to always say that never judge a political party by what it says in opposition, but what it does in government.
And Manmohan Singh is the right name to a word to actually end the discussion on reforms with. So I'm going to end now. Thank you for watching this show. We'll see you again same time next week.